Why was she always the quiet one in the room? Hayes stood in the back of the ballroom, her posture neat, her expression unreadable, her hands folded in front of her like she had nowhere particular to be. A black dress, a glass of untouched champagne, a face that blended into the shadows when it needed to. To anyone here tonight, she looked like a guest who barely mattered, maybe someone's distant cousin, maybe a friend of a friend. Forgettable. But the silence she carried wasn't born of shyness. It was armor. The chandelier light scattered across polished marble, throwing fragments of gold against the mirrored walls, but she felt none of it. Her eyes rested on the stage where her father had taken command of the microphone, commanding attention as if the wedding were his performance. His small frame seemed to grow larger with every word, his voice swelling with stories, jokes, praise. Praise for Daniel, always Daniel. Her brother sat at the head table beside his new wife, smiling politely as Dad painted his successes across the room in broad strokes. A regional manager at 38, a corner office, a six-figure salary, a company car, an American success story, Dad called him, the kind of man every father dreamed his son would be. The applause that followed was soft but genuine. Glasses clinked, laughter scattered around the room. And then her father's voice shifted, just slightly. A pause, a glance across the tables until his eyes found hers, a flicker of acknowledgement that was almost reluctant. "Of course, my daughter, well," he exhaled a chuckle. "She tried college, but that didn't work out. She's got some government job now. Security work, I think. Nothing too important." The room laughed politely, a little uncomfortably. It was supposed to be a harmless joke. That was how he told it anyway. But the words landed like a knife, sharp in their casual dismissal. And felt it again, that familiar burn that had lived in her chest since she was 12 years old. The burn when he told neighbors Daniel was the smart one, and she was the artistic one. The burn when he boasted about her brother's football scholarship, while ignoring her acceptance to Georgetown. The burn every Thanksgiving when her military years were reduced to playing soldier, and her career in law enforcement was written off as some desk job in Washington. That burn had followed her for decades, and tonight it returned with fire. She lowered her gaze, hiding the storm that threatened to show in her eyes. She couldn't afford to let it slip. Not here, not in front of him. Her phone buzzed against her palm, a message. She glanced down. Martinez Hayes, turn on Channel 7, now. Her pulse quickened. She slipped quietly from the ballroom, heels tapping softly against marble as she moved through the arched doorway and into the lobby. The crowd barely noticed her departure. Her father had them wrapped around his voice. A television hung above the hotel bar, casting its blue glow across the room. She lifted her eyes to it just as the news anchor's tone dropped into solemn gravity. In what officials are calling the most successful anti-narcotics operation in decades, the DEA has dismantled the notorious Santos cartel, seizing over $2 billion in drugs and assets. Footage filled the screen, armed agents in tactical gear, helicopters slicing through night air, bound cartel leaders shoved into armored vehicles. Her chest tightened. She knew every second of that footage. Leading the operation was Special Agent in Charge Hayes, a 24-year veteran whose intelligence methods revolutionized how federal agencies approach cartel infiltration. Her photograph appeared on screen, not the black dress, not the forgettable woman in the corner of a ballroom, but the other her. A crisp headshot, hair pulled back, eyes steady, shoulders squared. Authority radiated from it. Hayes, Special Agent in Charge, DEA, South American Operations. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. The anchor's words echoed. Likely nominee for administrator when Director Martinez retires next year. The bartender glanced up at the TV, then down at her. Recognition flickered. She turned away before he could form a question, before the threads of two worlds tangled. Aunt Carol's voice broke her thoughts. "Honey, what are you doing out here? You're missing the toast." Blinked, pulling herself back into the present. She offered a vague smile, but Carol's eyes followed her gaze to the screen. Helicopters. Seized bricks of cocaine stacked in towers taller than men. "Awful, isn't it?" Carol sighed. "All that drug violence. Thank goodness you've got a safe government job, not like those poor agents who have to deal with that mess." "Safe?" Almost laughed. 3 days ago, she had been rappelling from a helicopter into a Colombian jungle compound, rifle slung across her back, adrenaline pounding like a second heartbeat. Safe was the last word she would have used. But she said nothing. Just let Carol hook her arm through hers and lead her back toward the ballroom. "Come on," her aunt urged. "Your father's about to give his big speech." The noise hit her as soon as they returned. Clinking glasses, laughter, the hum of 300 voices at once. And then, the sharp ring of her father tapping a knife against his champagne flute. The room fell silent, all eyes turned toward him. Stopped near the back, just beyond the wash of chandelier light, and listened. "Ladies and," he began, puffing his chest, his tuxedo straining at the seams. "I want to talk tonight about success, about what it means to make something of yourself." Her stomach tightened. She knew exactly where this was going. Her father painted Daniel's life again in the broad, glowing strokes of a masterpiece. Football star, college graduate, a steady climb at the company ladder, a house, a wife, a corner office. Success, success, success. The applause that followed stung sharper than any silence. And then once more his voice shifted. "Now I love both my children." A beat, she braced herself. "But sometimes you have to be honest. My daughter, well, she dropped out of college, couldn't settle down, never gave me grandkids. She works for the government now. Security guard or something like that. Nothing wrong with that kind of work, of course, but it's not exactly what you dream of for your little girl." The words were casual, almost affectionate in tone, but they stripped her bare. The ballroom's eyes seemed to turn, some sympathetic, some curious, some pretending not to look. And still the phones buzzed silently in pockets and purses. Screens lit up with breaking news alerts. A few guests scrolled under the tablecloth, eyes widening as headlines flashed. "DEA takes down Santos cartel. Lead agent, REBECCAHAYES." But her father kept speaking, oblivious to the irony, the news running parallel to his words like a cruel joke. "Success," he declared, "comes from dedication, from making the right choices, from—" "Dad." Her voice cut through the air, sharper than she intended. The room froze, heads turned. Her father blinked, irritation flickering across his features. "Honey, I'm giving a toast. I need to correct something." Her heels clicked against the marble as she walked forward, slow, deliberate. A murmur rippled through the crowd, whispers rising like static. "You said I dropped out of college," she began. He shifted uncomfortably. "Well, yes, you left Georgetown after your first year." "I left to attend the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center," she said. Her voice carried with clarity she hadn't planned but now refused to temper. "I was recruited by the DEA." The murmurs swelled louder. "You said I'm a security guard. I'm a special agent in charge for the Drug Enforcement Administration. 24 years of service." Someone near the front gasped softly. Another pulled out their phone, scrolling furiously, then looking up at her, then back at the screen. She kept walking. "You said I never settled down. Last month I was awarded the Administrator's Award for Excellence. This week, I led the operation that dismantled the Santos cartel, the largest drug bust in federal history." Silence thick, heavy. Her father's face had drained of color. Around the room, heads turned between their phones and her face, reconciling the woman in the black dress with the photo glowing across news feeds. The crystal flute slipped from her father's hand, shattering against the marble floor. She didn't flinch. You said success comes from making the right choices, she said, voice steady, unwavering. You're right about that. I chose to serve my country. I chose to spend 2 decades infiltrating cartels, taking killers off the streets, keeping drugs out of schools. I chose to put my life on the line while you sat behind a desk selling policies. Her words cut like glass, but they weren't loud. They didn't need to be. I never told you what I really did, because I wanted you to be proud of me for who I was, not what I accomplished. I thought maybe you'd see value beyond job titles, paychecks, or... She paused, looked at him, looked at all of them. I was wrong. The silence that followed was absolute. The weight of it pressed against the walls, hung in the chandelier light, settled into every breath. And somewhere in that silence, she felt the smallest crack of something shift inside her chest. Not anger, not shame, something else. The first taste of freedom. How many secrets can one person carry before the silence becomes heavier than the truth? Walked away from the head table, her heels clicking against marble like the only sound in the world. The room behind her was still frozen, mouths parted, hands half raised as though no one knew whether to clap, speak, or simply pretend none of this had just happened. She reached the ballroom doors. The air felt thin in her lungs, but her back was straight, her pace deliberate. She told herself she wouldn't turn around, not once, not for him. And then she heard it. Await. Her father's voice, small now, stripped of bravado, a voice she'd never known. She paused, not because she wanted to, because it startled her, the break in him, the absence of that booming authority that had shadowed her entire life. I'm sorry, he whispered, the word fractured as it left him. For the first time in 43 years, her father sounded like a man who meant it. She didn't turn, didn't give him the grace of seeing her eyes, just let the word hang there between them, fragile, trembling. I know, she said softly, and then she stepped into the night. The cool air rushed against her skin, sharp and clean compared to the suffocating weight of chandeliers and champagne. She crossed the parking lot, each breath steadier than the last. For a moment, she let herself feel it, the relief of truth no longer hidden, the satisfaction of silence shattered. But peace never lasted long in her world. She slid into her car and checked her phone. 17 missed calls, reporters she'd never spoken to, friends from the academy, former partners, 43 texts, most congratulatory, and one message that made her heartbeat stutter. Martinez, Hayes, the president wants to meet with you Monday morning. Hope you enjoyed the wedding. She let out a breath that was half a laugh, half disbelief. The timing was obscene. She had just torn open decades of family silence in front of 300 witnesses, and now the White House wanted her. Her life never allowed for simple endings. She set the phone down, leaned back against the seat, and closed her eyes. The hotel lights blurred through the windshield. The music from inside faded into the distance. But her mind didn't rest. It never did. Because behind the news headlines and the champagne toasts was another story. The one no broadcast could tell. The nights that bled into mornings. The years spent in safe houses under names that weren't hers. The whispers in back alleys, the coded meetings, the wire transfers in shadowed banks. The part of her life no wedding guest could ever imagine. Her hand tightened on the steering wheel. Memory pulled her back whether she wanted it to or not. 3 nights ago. Rain hammered the tin roof of the safe house. The jungle beyond was a wall of darkness, thick and breathing. Sat at a wooden table, map spread before her, radio crackling with coded bursts. Her team was huddled around her, 6 agents, faces drawn, nerves wound tight from 18 months of chasing shadows. Operation Silent Thunder, the one they said couldn't be done, the one she had promised she would finish. Her second-in-command leaned closer, voice low. Intel says Santos himself is on site. This is it. Studied the satellite photos, the compound ringed with guards, the airstrip carved into the jungle, the heat signatures glowing like embers against the black. She didn't answer immediately. She never did. She let the silence draw out, measured, deliberate. Decisions in her world could not be rushed. Lives depended on her hesitation. Finally, she set her pen down. We go at 300, no margin for error. If we miss this, it's gone. They nodded. No one argued. They trusted her because she had earned it with scars, with sweat, with years of being the one who carried the weight when things went wrong. But what they didn't see, what no one saw, was the tremor in her chest. The quiet fear she'd learned to bury, not fear of dying. She had made peace with that long ago. Fear of failing them. Fear of letting one mistake ripple outward until it consumed everything. That was the fear she carried into every mission. She rubbed her temples, forcing the memory back into its cage. She was in her car again. The parking lot was still. The ballroom music muffled. Her phone buzzed once more. Another text, this time from, "They're already talking about you on Spanish news. Santos, lawyers are panicking. You did it." She stared at the words, "You did it." Funny, she didn't feel like she had. Instead, she felt hollow. The kind of hollow that years of victories had carved into her. Every takedown, every arrest, every "you did it" came with another file slid across her desk. Another face, another name, another life to dismantle. The wheel never stopped turning. And yet, at a wedding just an hour ago, her father had reduced her life's work to a security guard. That was the weight of silence. You could spend decades bleeding for something bigger than yourself, and if you never spoke it aloud, the world assumed you done nothing at all. Her headlights lit as she turned the key. She drove out into the night, the city stretching before her in lines of neon and shadow. And in the quiet hum of tires against asphalt, her mind whispered questions she couldn't silence. Would she ever be seen for who she truly was? Would her father's apology matter when it had come decades too late? And what price had she paid to live a life invisible to the people who should have known her best? The answers didn't come, they never did. But in the darkness, she knew one thing: the story wasn't finished. Not for her, not yet. What do you hear in the silence before a mission? For Hayes, it was never silence at all. It was the sound of her own heartbeat, the shallow breaths of agents around her, the rustle of gear, the muted clicks of magazines locking into rifles, and beneath it, the whisper of fear, unspoken but thick enough to taste. 2:45. The jungle pressed against the safe house like a living wall. The rain had slowed to a mist, each droplet hissing against leaves the size of shields. Insects buzzed unseen. Somewhere in the distance, a howler monkey let out a cry that echoed like a warning. Crouched over the table, night vision goggles pushed up onto her helmet, her finger tracing the outline of the compound for the 10th time. She knew the map by heart now. Every guard rotation, every possible entry point, every contingency if things went wrong, and things always went wrong. Adjusted his vest beside her. "We're ready." His voice was steady, but his eyes searched hers for something: reassurance, conviction, maybe just the steel that made them believe they'd come back alive. She nodded once. "We move." The team filed out into the jungle, rifles slung low, boots sinking into mud. They were shadows slipping through shadows, their breathing drowned by the night. Moved at the front, every sense sharpened. She had done this so many times before, and yet every time it felt like stepping off a cliff. The line between triumph and disaster was thinner than paper, and she carried every life in her hands. The compound emerged through the trees, corrugated metal roofs glinting faintly under the moon, guard towers glowing with cigarettes, a dozen heat signatures pulsing on her infrared like fireflies. She held up a fist. The team froze. Seconds stretched. She scanned the perimeter, reading movements the way others might read a language. A guard scratching his beard too long meant boredom. A pair of men shifting rifles at the same moment meant rehearsed patterns, weak points, openings. Her throat was dry, but her voice was steady when she whispered into the comms. 2 teams, north and east entry, on my mark. No one questioned. They never did. She exhaled, mark. The jungle erupted. Suppressed gunfire cracked like snapping branches. Guards fell before they could shout. Boots thundered across wet earth as her agents surged forward. Was already moving, breaching through the east gate, shoulders slamming the rusted metal until it gave way. Inside was chaos, shouts in Spanish, doors slamming. The compound came alive like a hornet's nest kicked open. Clear left's voice rang out. Contact second floor, another shouted. Rifle tracked targets as if her body moved before her mind. A guard raised his weapon. 2 rounds dropped him before the thought could register. Another burst through a doorway, machete glinting. She pivoted, fired, moved on. This was the rhythm. Life, death, decision, movement. Seconds stacked upon seconds until time itself fractured. She pushed up the stairs at her side. The door at the top was reinforced steel. Santos would be behind it. She knew it the way soldiers know the weight of gravity. Breacher, she ordered. Charges were set. Sparks hissed. The door blew inward with a scream of metal. And there he was. Santos, drug lord, murderer. The shadow that had poisoned cities, corrupted governments, drowned children in chemicals his men shipped north. He stood at the far side of the room, pistol trembling in his hand, rage and fear twisted across his face. For a heartbeat, everything went still. His team leveled rifles. Commands shouted in Spanish and English tangled in the air. Drop it, hands where I can see. Santos didn't move. His eyes locked on hers, something venomous in them. And then he smirked, just slightly. His chest tightened. That smirk. It was the smirk of men who believed they were untouchable, men who thought the world bent around their power. She'd seen it before too many times. Her finger brushed the trigger. Just one squeeze, and the world would never hear his name again. But she didn't. Because leadership wasn't about what you wanted in that moment. It was about what the law demanded, what justice required. She ordered quietly, cuff him. Her agent moved forward, snapping the man's wrists into steel. The smirk faded then, replaced by something else, realization. The fall of an empire wasn't always an explosion. Sometimes it was just the cold click of handcuffs in the dark. Target secured, she said into her comms. The compound was cleared within minutes, drugs stacked like walls, ledgers thicker than Bibles, weapons caches that could have armed small nations. Every piece of it would go into evidence, brick by brick dismantling what Santos had built. But wasn't thinking about evidence. She wasn't even thinking about victory. She was thinking about her team. The faces around her slick with sweat and rain, eyes wide with the shock of being alive. She scanned them all, counted them, every single one accounted for. Only then did she let herself breathe. Hours later, as dawn bled pale light across the jungle, helicopters thundered overhead. News cameras would catch the footage. Politicians would write speeches. Her name would be typed into headlines. But she knew the truth. The truth was the silence before the mission, the fear that never left, the choices no one else saw, the weight of lives carried in her chest. And as she watched Santos shoved into a helicopter, shackled and seething, felt no triumph, no joy. Only the quiet knowledge that tomorrow, another name would land on her desk, another war would begin. Because this was never the end. What does victory feel like when no one at home even knows who you are? Stared out the airplane window, the clouds below stretched endless and white. The engines hummed steady, the pressed against her ribs, but her chest felt weightless, hollow. 48 hours ago, she had stormed a compound in the Colombian jungle. Now she was flying back to Washington, an invited guest of the President of the United States. She should have felt something, pride, triumph, relief. But she didn't. All she could hear was her father's voice in the ballroom. She's got some government job. Security guard, I think. 300 people had heard him dismiss her life into a single careless sentence. 300 people had seen her crack the silence wide open and tell the truth. 300 people had watched her father's face pale as the truth cut through his fiction. And yet she couldn't stop replaying the end. His voice soft, breaking, "Wait, I'm sorry." 2 words she had chased for 4 decades. But what were they worth when they came too late? The plane shuddered through turbulence. She tightened her grip on the armrest. Not fear, control. That was always her instinct. Control the reaction, control the breathing, control the tremor in your chest. Her phone buzzed. She checked it, half expecting another congratulation, another reporter request. Instead, it was, "You okay? Haven't seen you smile since the raid." She typed a reply, paused, deleted it, tried again. "I'm fine, just tired." A lie, he'd know it. But sometimes lies were easier to carry than the truth. When the plane touched down the chaos began immediately. Cameras flashing, microphones shoved toward her as she exited the terminal. Voices shouting her name, questions piling over each other. "How does it feel to bring down Santos?" "What's next for you, Agent Hayes?" "Is it true you're in line to be the next administrator?" She pushed through them without answer, escorted by 2 men in dark suits. The car door closed, the noise muffled. Silence again. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Straight to Langley," one of the men said. "Briefing in an hour." She nodded. The city blurred past the tinted windows, but her mind wasn't in Washington. It was still in that ballroom, her father's face, her brother's shock, the way the crowd had turned, phones glowing with her name. No mission had ever rattled her like that. Not raids, not standoffs with cartel killers. Family had always been her blind spot. Because unlike the DEA, there were no rules of engagement with blood. No tactical manual for fathers who couldn't see their daughters. Her phone buzzed again, unknown number. She almost ignored it, then answered. "Agent Hayes," a voice polished formal. "Yes." "This is Mason, Office of Presidential Scheduling. The President would like to meet with you Monday morning at 900. Closed her eyes. The surreal weight of it pressed in. One man had called her a failure his whole life. Another, the most powerful man in the country, now wanted her advice. "Understood," she said evenly. "I'll be there." The line clicked dead. She leaned back against the leather seat, the city lights flickering across her face. And for the first time she asked herself, did she even want this? The spotlight, the headlines, the awards, they all felt like decorations on a coffin she'd been building for years. Every accolade carried memories no one else saw, nights in safe houses staring at photographs of men she had to hunt, mornings where she stitched wounds with trembling hands, evenings where she wondered if anyone at home would even notice if she didn't come back. And now the president wanted to shake her hand. But her father had never even asked what she really did. The car slowed, pulling into the secured lot at Langley. She braced herself. The next hours would be briefings, debriefings, reports, politics. The machine kept turning, and she was one cog, even if the world called her a hero. Still, as she stepped out of the car, she caught her reflection in the glass of the building. Black suit, badge at her hip, lines etched deep into her face. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Was this who she wanted to be, or just who she had to become? The thought lingered as she walked inside, the doors hissing shut behind her. Why is it that the world only sees you once it's already too late? Lay awake in her apartment, city lights slipping through the blinds like slivers of gold across the ceiling. It was nearly 3 in the morning, and she hadn't slept more than 2 hours in days. The adrenaline from still pulsed faintly in her veins, refusing to fade. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard it again, the crack of suppressed gunfire, the echo of Santos' smirk, the shuffle of boots against wet jungle earth. But it wasn't just the raid haunting her. It was the wedding, the look on her father's face, the silence that followed her words, thick enough to drown in, the phone buzzing in her purse with colleagues congratulating her while her own family stared at her like she was a stranger. She rolled onto her side, staring at the clock. 3 days until the White House. Her phone lit on the nightstand. Another text. She reached for it, half expecting maybe Martinez, but the name froze her hand. Dad. She opened it, just 5 words. Can we talk, please, Dad? Her chest tightened. She set the phone back down, face first, as if turning away from the screen could turn away from the weight of the message. Talk, after 4 decades of silence, judgment, dismissal, now he wanted to talk. She pressed her palms into her eyes until stars flared against the darkness. The ache in her chest wasn't anger anymore. It was something softer, heavier. Exhaustion. By dawn, she was in Langley. The glass towers gleamed cold in the early light, reflecting a sky streaked with pale orange. She passed through security, her ID badge scanning green. The building swallowed her, all steel and silence and the faint hum of power running through its veins. Inside the briefing room, Director Martinez was waiting. His presence filled the space, but not the way her father filled a ballroom. Martinez commanded without theatrics. His authority was quiet, the kind that came from years of leading men and women into storms and bringing them back alive. Hayes, he greeted, voice firm but warm. Sit. She did. Files lay spread across the table, photos clipped, reports printed, the whole operation condensed into paper and ink. You did it, Martinez said simply. Silent Thunder will be in the history books. She nodded once, her eyes tracing the grain of the wood rather than his face. Praise had never sat comfortably on her shoulders. He studied her. But you don't look like someone who just made history. Exhaled through her nose, leaning back. History doesn't feel the way people think it does. Martinez's lips curved faintly. No, it never does. He tapped the files. The president wants to meet you Monday. You'll brief him directly. You'll also testify before Congress next month. The words landed like weights stacked on her chest. She gave a sharp nod. You don't want this attention, Martinez observed. She met his eyes finally. Wanting has nothing to do with it. Silence stretched. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. You've spent 24 years hiding in shadows, Hayes. Maybe it's time the country sees the cost of what you've given it. The cost. She thought of sleepless nights in safe houses, rain hammering on tin roofs while she studied faces of men who'd kill without blinking. She thought of the blood that soaked her sleeves, sometimes hers, sometimes her team's, sometimes men she had to drag into custody alive when every instinct screamed to pull the trigger. She thought of the distance in her family's eyes, of her father introducing her as the one who never finished college. Yes, the country could see the cost, but would it ever understand it? The meeting ended with Martinez's hand heavy on her shoulder. Get some rest before Monday. You've earned it. Earned it, another phrase that tasted like iron in her mouth. That night back in her apartment, she sat on the couch in the dark, the TV flickering with news she didn't turn up loud enough to hear. Her father's text still sat unanswered on her phone. She stared at it until the screen dimmed, the words disappearing into black. She thought about replying, about giving him what he wanted, closure, a chance. But something in her couldn't move. Because talking wouldn't erase the years of silence. Talking wouldn't unmake the little girl who had stood at her high school graduation, waiting for her father's pride and receiving only indifference. Talking wouldn't undo the burn of being unseen at every milestone of her life. No, words couldn't fix that. She rose, poured herself a glass of water, and set the phone again. The only sound in the apartment was the ticking of the kitchen clock. And somewhere deep inside she wondered, would she ever feel at home again anywhere? What does it mean to stand in the place everyone dreams of and feel nothing at all? The White House loomed pale against the morning sky, its columns washed in gold light, the flag snapping in the autumn wind. Hayes walked up the steps flanked by Secret Service agents, her heels striking marble in a rhythm that echoed louder in her head than it did in the air. Every camera turned. Flashes burst. Reporters shouted her name as though she were a celebrity, not a woman who had spent 2 decades living in shadows. "Agent Hayes, over here. Can you comment on Operation Silent Thunder? Are you the next administrator?" She kept her eyes forward, expression steady. Years of undercover work had taught her the art of stillness, the way to let chaos swirl without touching you. Inside, the noise fell away. The halls of the West Wing hummed with order, polished wood, and gleaming floors absorbing the frenzy outside. She was led through corridors lined with history, portraits of men who had shaped nations staring down at her. A part of her wondered if she belonged here at all. The waiting room was small, silent except for the shuffle of papers from an aide seated behind a desk. Stood, hands clasped loosely, eyes tracing the framed photographs on the wall, presidents with world leaders, Marines raising flags, astronauts saluting. The aide looked up. "He'll see you now." She stepped into the Oval Office. The president rose from behind his desk, hand extended, smile broad but measured. "Agent Hayes," he greeted. "It's an honor." She shook his hand. His grip was firm, his gaze direct. For a man who carried the weight of a nation, his presence was surprisingly human. "Please," he said, gesturing toward the chairs near the fireplace. "Sit." She did. The conversation that followed was formal, precise. He asked about the operation, the intelligence breakthroughs, the cooperation with Colombian authorities. She answered with clarity, her voice steady, every detail honed by years of testifying in courtrooms and briefing directors. But beneath the surface, she felt strangely detached, like she was watching herself from a distance, listening to a stranger recite her life's work. When he leaned back finally, nodding, he said, "Agent Hayes, your country owes you a debt. The courage you've shown, the sacrifices you've made, they represent the very best of us." The words should have meant everything. They should have filled the hollow places inside her with pride, with validation, with the weight of finally being seen. But all she heard, under the president's polished praise, was her father's voice. "Security guard, nothing too important." The two voices overlapped in her chest like echoes colliding. One gave her the highest honor in the land. The other had shaped her childhood. And no matter how loud the president's voice was, the old one refused to fade. She straightened, thanked him, answered when he spoke of her future. But when she left the Oval Office an hour later, shaking hands with aides, nodding at flashing cameras, she felt the same emptiness gnawing at her ribs. In the car back to Langley, she leaned her head against the glass. The city blurred by monuments, marble, tourists with cameras. All of it seemed distant, untouchable. Her phone buzzed again, another text from her father. "I meant what I said. Please let me make it right." She stared at it until the letters blurred. The President of the United States knew her name. The Attorney General had praised her in front of the cabinet. Congress was preparing to honor her. And still, the only message that mattered was from the man who had never once asked about her life, until it was broadcast on national news. She closed her eyes, pressed the phone to her chest, and whispered to no one, "Why now?" The city hummed on. The car rolled forward, and felt like she was standing on two cliffs at once, one where the world celebrated her, and one where she was still just a daughter waiting to be seen. What does it cost to live a life where every victory feels like loss? Stood in front of the mirror that morning, adjusting the dark blazer over her shoulders, the lapel pin gleaming under the bathroom light. Her reflection looked immaculate, pressed, professional, unshakable. The kind of image that Congress wanted to see, that the cameras would capture. But she didn't see the blazer. She saw the faint scar above her collarbone, a jagged reminder of 5 years ago. She saw the shadow in her eyes that no concealer could erase. She saw the lines etched deeper than her age. The country would see a decorated agent today, but saw the woman who hadn't slept more than 3 hours at a time in years. The woman who woke to phantom echoes of gunfire. The woman who had carried too many names in her chest, names of teammates she couldn't save. The car arrived at 9. She slid into the back seat, papers in hand, testimony rehearsed, her breathing slow and steady. Outside, Washington buzzed, sirens cutting the morning air, tourists flooding the sidewalks. She felt none of it. Her body was there, but her mind was already in the chamber. The Capitol loomed ahead, white and monumental, a temple to democracy. Its steps swarmed with cameras, reporters pressing microphones toward her as she walked. Questions fired like bullets, but she moved through them with the same discipline she had in jungles and alleys. 1 foot, then the next, no hesitation, no break in stride. Inside, the chamber was cool, the air conditioned to a chill that seeped into her bones. Rows of lawmakers sat in elevated seats, their eyes on her as she took her place at the witness table. A glass of water, a microphone, a stack of prepared remarks. "Special Agent in Charge Hayes," the chairman announced, "please begin." She unfolded her papers, but for a long moment she didn't speak. She let the silence hold. She had learned long ago that silence could command more power than words. Finally, her voice carried, steady but soft. "Ladies, and I've spent 24 years fighting cartels most Americans will never see. I've walked into jungles where the air itself felt like it wanted to kill you. I've led agents who trusted me with their lives, and I've buried friends who never came home. What I can tell you is this: what you see on the news, what you read in reports, it's only the surface." Her words found rhythm, not rehearsed but lived. She spoke of the cartel's reach, the poison they pushed into American cities, the children whose lives ended before they began. She spoke of the raids, the safe houses, the endless cycle of names and faces that blurred into each other. But woven between the facts was something else, the quiet confession of what it meant to be human inside a machine of shadows. "I've been called a hero this past week," she said. "I don't feel like one. Heroes go home at the end of the day. Heroes get to sit at their children's bedsides and know they'll wake to see them grow. My life hasn't looked like that. My life has been chasing men who kill without hesitation, living under names that weren't mine, waiting for the knock at the door that might end everything." The chamber was silent. Even the shuffle of papers had stilled. She drew a breath, steady but tight. "Do I believe the fight is worth it? Yes, every day. Because every dollar of drugs we take off the street is a child who won't taste that poison. Every cartel boss we put in chains is one less hand pushing violence into our neighborhoods. But the cost is real, not just to me. To every agent who spends their life in shadows, unseen, unnamed, uncelebrated. They deserve to be seen. Not just when we win, not just when we die, but every day we carry the burden so others don't have to." Her throat tightened. She forced the pause, let the weight sit in the air. She thought of the scar down his forearm from a night gone wrong. She thought of, buried in Arlington after a raid that fell apart in smoke and blood. She thought of every name etched in her memory, a litany she would never say aloud. When she finished, the room didn't clap. They weren't supposed to. But the silence that followed was heavy with something else: respect, unease, the realization that behind the words national security were bones and blood. As she left the chamber, cameras surged again. Reporters shouting, flashes exploding, microphones chasing her steps. She moved through it like a storm, face still, voice. Back in the car, she leaned her head against the seat. For a moment, she closed her eyes. The sound of applause still absent, but the silence of the chamber louder than any cheer. Her phone buzzed again. "Dad." This time, a longer message. I listened to your testimony. I'm proud of you. I don't deserve to say it now, but I am. Can we meet, just the two of us?" Her chest constricted. The man who had never once asked her about her world had watched her bear it in front of Congress. He had heard what no family gathering ever let her say, and now he wanted to meet. She stared at the words until they blurred. Pride. That word she had chased since she was a girl. That word that had never been spoken aloud until now. Her thumb hovered over the reply. She didn't press it, not yet. The city rolled past the window, but her eyes were far away, somewhere between the chambers of power and the small-town living room, where she had first learned that silence could burn deeper than words. What do you owe someone who only sees you after the world already has? Sat in her car outside the diner, engine idling, headlights casting long beams across the cracked asphalt. Through the window she could see him, her father, sitting in a corner booth, a half-empty coffee cup in front of him, his hands folded like he was praying. He looked smaller than she remembered, or maybe she had just grown beyond the shadow he once cast. The text was still open on her phone. Can we meet, just the two of us? She had driven here without answering. No promise, no warning, just curiosity, just something. Her hand tightened on the steering wheel. Part of her wanted to walk in, to sit across from him, to let him say the words she had chased for 43 years. I'm proud of you. Part of her wanted to hear it from his lips, not a glowing screen. But another part of her, the deeper part, wondered why it mattered now. Because she had already stood in the Oval Office. She had already briefed Congress. She had already led men into fire and pulled them out alive. She had already been seen by the world. And the truth was, she didn't need his pride to make any of that real. Her phone buzzed again, another message. I know I failed you. I can't change the past, but I want to try now, please. Her throat tightened. She looked through the glass again. He sipped his coffee, eyes on the table, shoulders hunched as though the weight of decades pressed down all at once. She thought of the little girl who had waited on bleachers for him to clap, only to hear him brag about her brother instead. She thought of the woman in, rain hammering the roof while she mapped out death and survival. She thought of the wedding, of crystal shattering on marble, of her father's face pale with realization. Slowly she turned the key. The engine fell silent. She opened the door, stepped out. Her heels clicked against pavement as she crossed the lot. Each step was heavier than the last. Each step was lighter, too. She reached the door, paused. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, the same woman who had stood in jungles and courtrooms and ballrooms, unshaken. And she realized something. Whether she walked inside or not, she had already answered him. Because dignity doesn't wait for applause. Dignity doesn't beg to be seen. Dignity simply acts. Turned away from the door. She walked back to her car, the night air cool against her skin, the stars sharp above the city. She didn't look back at the booth, didn't let herself search his face again. She slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled onto the road. The headlights stretched forward, cutting a path into the dark. Her phone buzzed once more, then stilled. She didn't check it. She didn't need to. Because for the first time in her life, Hayes felt something deeper than pride, sharper than validation. She felt free. And in the quiet hum of the road, she let the truth settle into her chest, steady and unshakable. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply walks away.